Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be covering my top 10 board games that I need to play more often. These are board games that I love, I enjoy, I adore, but for whatever reason I haven't gotten them to the table enough. Now, in order for a board game to qualify for this list, I must have played it no more than 5 times. Now, for some people, 5 times sounds like a lot of plays. However, for me, I replay the games that I enjoy and that I love quite often, so 5 plays is not a lot at all. Now, some of these games I've played as few as 1 time. And for whatever reason, again, a different amount of reasons, some of these games are very new to me. Others simply just do not appeal to a lot of the other people that I play with or I game with. Some of them just require higher player counts or they're lengthier games for what they have to offer. And for whatever reason, again, they just have not surpassed that 5 play threshold. I do believe that some of these games, with time, will easily pass that threshold because I do love them. And again, some of these are just relatively new to me. Now, as far as the ranking is concerned, I rank the games based on a couple of factors. First of all, how much I feel the game still has left for me to explore, how much it has left to offer. Also, just how much I enjoy the game overall. And finally, how many times I played the game. So the fewer amount of times I played the game, the more likely it will be ranked higher on this top 10 list. So without any further ado, we're going to move on to my number 10 board game that I need to play more often, and it is none other than Colosseum, designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Marcus Lupke, and published by Tasty Minstrel Games. This is actually a reprint by TMG. Now, this game is a game where each player is running their own Colosseum, and they're trying to put on performances, and they're acquiring a bunch of different resources, assets, actors, props, in order to carry out those performances and attract as many spectators as possible. And heck, if you're lucky enough, you might even attract the attention of a senator or even the emperor himself. Now, this game has some neat mechanisms. You have resource management, you have some auction and bidding, you have some trading going on, and all this stuff. And finally, your final score will be the performance of the 5 that you put out. There's 5 rounds. That was the most successful. So the scoring is not actually cumulative. It may or may not be even your last performance. It might be your penultimate or even your 3rd performance that might end up being your final score. However, you want to build up because it's most likely for you to win with your final performance. Now, this game is awesome mechanically. However, it is a multiplayer game. You do need at least 3 people for it to be functional, maybe about 4 or 5 for it to be optimal. It's harder to get these big groups. It is a little bit longer, and lots of the people that I game with do not like it nearly as much as I like it. But this game ranks really high on my personal top 50 board games of all time. Check out that video if you want to see as to where. It's a phenomenal game, a beautiful production, great component quality. I need to get it to the table more often, and I hope to sporadically play this game more as my life goes on. My number 10 board game I need to play more often, Colosseum. Now we move on to my number 9, and my number 9 is Kingsburg, designed by Andrea Chiarvesio and Luca Iannacco, and this is published by Z-Man Games. And this is also a reprint. This is a 2nd edition, which includes the To Forge a Realm expansion, along with an additional module. This is a worker placement game where you're rolling dice, and your dice are your workers, and based on the pips on the dice, determine what spots you can go to. And the board consists of a bunch of different court officials and, the king and queen, different spots that you can go to in order to influence them and gain whatever benefit it is. It might be a resource like gold or stone or wood. It might be to strengthen your military or what have you. And these things are all wonderful. There's lots of ways to mitigate your dice roll. There's tokens that allow you to add to your dice roll. There's buildings that you build that allow you to modify slightly what you roll for your dice. And basically, that is what you're doing. You're building a city. Each player is building their own portion of Kingsburg, consisting of different buildings. And these buildings, for the most part, are going to score you your points. You're also trying to protect your city with enough military strength from the onslaught, the invasion of different enemies, different fantastical enemies. So there is a little bit of a fantasy element, albeit abstracted and a little thin and pasted on, but it's still there. Fun game. Excellent mechanisms. Again, I love worker placement. I love city building. I love dice rolling when there's a good enough or a healthy amount of dice mitigation or luck mitigation This game is excellent. It would have ranked higher, but I have played this 4 times, which is still more than some of the other games on this list. But for how much I adore this game, 4 times is not nearly enough. My number 9 board game I need to play more often, Kingsburg. And now we move on to my number 8. And my number 8, one of the reasons why it is here, I've only played it 3 times, is because until today, or not until today, until recently, I have not owned this game. My number 8 board game I need to play more often is Clank, the original Clank, a deck building adventure. And this is a game that was owned by my cousin Rodney, and I literally just bought it from him a week ago for the great price of $10. Because while Rodney likes Clank, he doesn't like it nearly as much as I do. Now, this game, I've only played it 3 times. One of the reasons why it doesn't rank higher for me is because I've only played this at 2 players, and I get the impression, I'm sure those who play the game more often than I can confirm, that this game is more fun with 3 or more people, when you have all these people racing to get out of the dungeon before the dragon catches them, and so on and so forth. I love deck building games. I love deck building games that have a 3-dimensional element where you're doing just more than deck building. I love deck building games that have multiple currencies. This game has 3 different currencies. You have your money, you have your swords, and you have your boots. And you even have your Clank, which is basically a negative currency that hurts you. Fun game, nice fantastical theme. Again, I'm looking forward to playing it. Not only more often, but playing it with more players. My number 8 board game that I need to play more often, only 3 times as of yet, Clank, a deck building adventure. Now we move on to my number 7 board game that I need to play more often, and that is Glass Road, designed by Uwe Rosenberg and published by Mayfair Games. I believe this game is out of print right now, but I was lucky enough to snatch a copy. This game, I've only played it 3 times, just like Clank, and it is phenomenal for how much game length you have here. And a 2-player game takes about 35 minutes. The game is so rich, the game is so deep, the game is so crunchy. It gives you so many satiating and fulfilling decision-making opportunities. You're managing this resource wheel, which is really the bread and butter of the game. And as you manipulate that resource wheel, not only do you gain and lose certain resources, but you turn the dial, which increases your production of glass and brick, which are actually the two most important resources in this game, hence the name Glass Road. And these resources, especially the glass and the brick, allow you to buy different buildings that score you points in different ways, that acquire and accrue different resources for you in different ways, that give you special one-time abilities. But the coolest part of this game is that you're doing this kind of like variable phase order thing where you're choosing different character cards that give you different player powers, and you're trying to have a good balance of playing cards that you don't think anybody else will pick, because if you pick cards that nobody else picks on that round, that nobody selected for their hand of 5 cards, then you're gonna get the 2 actions that are listed on that card. Also, if you sneak in a couple, because you're only gonna play 3 out of those 5 cards, if you sneak in a couple other cards into your hand of 5 that your opponent happened to play, then you get to piggyback on their action. First of all, they only get to carry out 1 out of those 2 actions on the card, and now you get to carry out 1 of the actions on the card as well, which adds to the total amount of actions you had in that turn. There's a plethora of ways of scoring depending on the different buildings that you acquire, so it's definitely a point salad in that regard. It's very open-ended, and as the game goes on, you'll know which direction you're going in. Tons of buildings, tons of variability just here in the base game, and again, a brilliantly executed resource wheel that you have to manage and manipulate throughout the game. Only played this game 3 more times. It's so short, I need to get it to the table more. My number 7 board game I need to play more often, Glass Road. And now my number 6 board game I need to play more often is Pillars of the Earth, designed by Michael Renack and Stefan Stadler. And this game I've also only played 3 times. This is also a reprint of a game that was out of print long ago, but Cosmos Games reprinted it. This game is known for having one of the most beautiful boards in all of gamedom. You know, it is just gorgeous, designed produced by Michael Menzel. The board is absolutely gorgeous, highly functional, very intuitive. As all the worker placement, it is a worker placement game, all the worker placement actions are triggered clockwise. So it's very streamlined and easy to manage. And you know that your action that your worker activates here will affect a later action from a worker you place somewhere later on in the clockwise circle. So that's something to factor in as you make your decisions. It's a very relatively light box for how heavy of a game it is. I'm not saying it's the heaviest of game, but it's definitely a medium to heavy worker placement game. Fun game. I personally enjoy the intellectual property of Pillars of the Earth and have watched the series, the drama series, which was really fun and very, really entertaining. I've only played this game 3 times. My wife Lily and I enjoy it. I've never won this game, by the way, in the 3 times we played. My wife Lily always beats me, but it is fun and we need to get it to the table more often. My number 6 board game I need to play more often, Pillars of the Earth. Now we move on to my number 6, and we have another Uwe Rosenberg game, and that is Ora Labora. And this game here, I've played this game 3 times. This is ranked as low as my number 6, not because of how much I do not like this game. I love this game. I adore this game. But because the games above it, I've played actually less often than this, less than 3 times. So that's a little spoiler right there. I played this game 3 times. It is a heavy, long game. This is probably the longest Uwe Rosenberg game I play. I play the shortened version of this game, and it's still easily over an hour and a half of gameplay, about 2 hours of gameplay with my wife and I. I think if I played the longer version of the game, it probably would push towards 3 hours. It could definitely lend itself to analysis paralysis because there's so many amazing options you could pursue in this game. Again, you have a wonderful resource wheel that you are managing and manipulating to determine how many resources you gather whenever you trigger certain abilities. It also tells you when certain rounds are triggered, rounds that allow you to build additional buildings and what have you. You're building buildings throughout the game. You're placing your workers. It has a unique feature where you have a monk that the moment you place him down, the moment you build a new building, you could place a monk, a particular worker of yours, the monk, you can place him on that newly acquired building and trigger its ability immediately, right? And if you don't have any monks, you could always pay your, if you don't have any workers, you could always pay your opponent in order to use one of their workers to place on one of their buildings. So that's always a really cool, neat feature. You start with a basic board, and as the game goes, you expand, eastward, westward, northward, southward, and by the end of the game, you have this huge board covered with so many different buildings on it. It is a phenomenal game. My number 5 board game, or number 6 board game, I need to play more often. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, my number 5 board game I need to play more often. Ora Labora. And now we move on to my number 4 board game I need to play more often, and that is Deadwood. And this is a nice Wild West worker placement game. I love Wild West themed in board games. I feel like the Wild West theme really lends itself to board games. There's so many neat things going on. The exploration of land, the expansion of land, the, combat between cowboys, the growth of different industries and the railroad, the city building that takes place in this time frame or in this setting. Really, really cool. And all that stuff takes place in the game of Deadwood. As a matter of fact, the building of the railroad is one of the end game triggers. And there's a lot of dueling going on because you have worker placement, but you can go to a place that is blocked if you're willing to engage in combat with your opponent that happens to be on that spot. And dueling is really cool, really neat, because your different workers have different powers or different strength levels. So a stronger worker is more likely to beat a weaker worker in a duel. However, that weaker worker still has an outside chance of beating that stronger worker. So you may not want to risk it. Fun game, city building. You're slowly building the city of Deadwood, adding different buildings that give you different abilities. But it almost feels like you're working on something to some extent collaboratively. You're all making decisions that add different buildings to the game and make the city of Deadwood a more complete place to live in. But again, with all that combating. Now, what's interesting here is your workers actually die. When they get killed, they don't just get off the board. They go to Boot Hill, which is like a grave for all the dead cowboys, and they don't come back, right? So as the game goes by, that's the tension that you're working with. You have less workers to work with. You don't always have all your workers available because if they're on the board, you have to use an action just to get them off of the board. And some of them might not be in your ranch. They're just in your general supply. And you might have to trigger some actions that bring them into your ranch and therefore make them available for you to place them on buildings during future turns. Really fun game with lots of things to keep an eye on. Lots of different end game conditions. But I've only played this game 2 times, and that's why it's my number 4 board game I need to play more often, Deadwood. And now we move on to my number 3, and my number 3 is Steam, designed by Martin Wallace and published by Mayfair Games. And this game here, I've only played it 2 times again. And it is a longer economic, pickup and delivery train game that needs 3 or more players, at least with the maps that come in the base game. I do hear that there are some expansion maps that you can purchase that are specifically designed for 2 players. I'm sure there's lots of variants out there that can accommodate only 2 players. But straight up from the box, as the rules read, this is a 3 or more player game. And because of that, and again, it's game length, it's kind of heavy from an economical perspective, and not necessarily a game that speaks to all the people that I game with. However, it does speak to me, and that's why it's ranked number 3 as a game that I want to play more often. First of all, there is some route network building, which I am fascinated by that mechanism, that gameplay mechanism. I love building routes, and the way the routes work here is so cool because you have all these different tracks that you're laying on the board, and you have all these different options as to what directions and what configurations they go into, how much they cost, how much they're modified or changed by the fact that they're placed on certain terrain types, whether it be rivers or maybe mountains or hills or towns and all that stuff. Really, really cool, fun. I love the system of getting indebted and eventually climbing out of your debt and making it so that your engine is so smooth that you're building these long routes, making these great deliveries, and just acquiring lots of money and ultimately lots of victory points for the win. This is a re-implementation or a reimagining of the original Age of Steam, which still has lots of hardcore fans, designed by the very same Martin Wallace. I'm not so sure if I'm interested in that game. I've seen its component quality, and it's even inferior to Mayfair's Steam game, which is not the most amazing game component-wise, but is adequate. I love the gameplay. I love the streamlined fashion. I love the fact that it doesn't sound as mean and as cutthroat as I hear Age of Steam can be. My number 3 board game with only 2 plays that I need to play more often, Steam. And now we move on to my number 2 board game that I need to play more often, and it is Amun-Re, designed by Reiner Knizia, and this is a reprint designed by Tasty Minstrel Games. And I guess that's a theme, a reoccurring theme for this list. Lots of these games are reprints, right? So this game is designed by Tasty Minstrel, or published by Tasty Minstrel, designed by Reiner Knizia. I feel that this is the pinnacle, the epitome of Reiner Knizia's auction bidding games. I've only played this game 2 times, by the way. 2 times, but I love it. It is the culmination of decades worth of work from Reiner Knizia, working with these basic auction bidding mechanism games like Modern Art and High Society, and eventually growing and evolving to having this very robust game where you happen to have some auction bidding, and the auction bidding is just part of the game. I mean, it's a big part of the game because it determines what areas, this is like an area control game, it determines what areas players are going to control, and it also determines how players are going to score, because there's a little bit of like a hidden auction towards the end of the round also, where you're offering to Amun-Re, and that's kind of an auction of sorts, and that auction determines how many points the players are going to score for their different regions. Really cool, so much things to factor in, the different farmers you're trying to acquire, you're trying to purchase different cards, you're trying to build pyramids in your areas so that you can score more points. There's some hidden ways of scoring as well. Fun game. I need to explore this game much more often than just 2 times. My number 2 board game that I need to play more often, Amun-Re. And now we move on to my number 1 board game that I need to play more often. I've only played this game 1 time. It's not necessarily that I like this game more than these other games, but because it's the game that I only played 1 time, it had to make it to number one. And I do like this game quite a lot for just having played it one time. My number one board game I need to play more often, 1960, Making of a President. Designed by Jason Matthews and Christian Leonard and published by GMT Games. I think this was originally published by Z-Man, but again, another reprint that was picked up by GMT and fits in the line of GMT Games. Now, this game is a huge game. I mean, it's a big, long game. This game is easily a 2-hour game. But it's so cool because it's so asymmetric. One person takes the Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy. Another person takes the Republican Party of Richard Nixon. And it doesn't feel like a very political game in the aspect of the controversial subjects and topics that are quite often discussed in politics. You're just basically two players trying to win votes and campaigning in the different 50 states of the country. You're trying to win over the influence of the media. You're trying to win over certain states that have more electoral votes. You're trying to hold on to the states that already favor your political party, but also try to steal away from your opponent some of the states that favor his or her political party. There's lots of cards that are played that can be used in multiple different ways, so it's like a multi-use card game, which I do enjoy. Some of the multi-use cards can just be used to hurt your opponent. Others can be used to invest towards your campaign. It's interesting. It has a really cool, neat mechanism for manipulating travel throughout the different states. I really like that. And the cards that hurt your opponents really feel cool without necessarily feeling like a crushing blow. These cards all have historical references, so they refer to different historical real-life things that happened during this time frame, the early 1960s, late 1950s. Fun game, educational, but at the same time, it feels like you're having a great time. It's a very thought-provoking two-player game with lots of strategy involved and even a little bit of press your luck as you make certain decisions to campaign in certain places. Fun game. I've only played this game one time, but I am so sure that this is not a fluke and that if I play it more often, I will like it. However, again, it is a long game. It's only a two-player game, and it's not necessarily a game that I can play with everybody that I game with. So, even so, while I do hope to play it more often, it probably won't be much more often. My number one board game I need to play more, 1960, The Making of a President. And that's it, folks. That is my list for today. Tell me, what are your games that you need to play more often? Which games are you surprised that I have not played more? I'm sure some of these games I speak of so highly, I sing their praises so loudly that you perhaps have imagined that I played it more. But no, I do need to get these games to the table more often than I do currently. All right, well, this is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.